Hello, my name is Caleb. I'm 36, divorced 2 years now, and I live on Dogwood Lane in a quiet suburb outside Richmond, Virginia. The houses here are old enough that the trees remember when the streets were gravel, and new enough that nobody really knows each other anymore. I like it that way. After the marriage ended, quietly, no shouting, just papers and separate driveways, I wanted silence more than anything else. So I bought the smallest house I could find with a decent porch and a low wooden fence that doesn't pretend to keep anyone out. I'm a structural engineer. I spend my days making sure bridges and buildings don't fall down, which feels ironic when you consider how easily everything else in my life did. Most evenings I come home, change into jeans and an old hoodie, and do the small things that keep a house from looking abandoned. Sweep the leaves, check the gutters, drink coffee on the porch until the dark swallows the street. It was one of those October evenings, the kind where the air smells like wood smoke and the light turns gold and thin. I was raking the last of the fallen maple leaves into a pile when I heard the soft scrape of a shovel on dirt. 2 houses down, past the empty lot everyone uses as a shortcut, Ivy was kneeling in the far corner of her backyard. I'd seen her before, of course. Everyone had. 44, maybe 45. Tall, dark hair, usually twisted up with what looked like a paintbrush. Always alone. She moved like someone who had learned long ago that hurrying attracted attention. She was digging a shallow hole beside the hydrangeas. In her hands was a small cedar box, no bigger than a hardcover book. The lid was carved with something I couldn't make out from this distance. She set it in the earth like she was laying a child to rest, then covered it carefully, patting the soil flat with the back of the shovel the way you smooth a blanket. I didn't mean to stare. I swear I didn't. But the rake stopped moving and my eyes wouldn't leave her. There was something about the way she did it, no tears, no ceremony, just quiet certainty, that felt more private than anything I'd witnessed in years. Then she looked up, straight at me. Across 2 lawns and 50 feet of fading light, her eyes found mine and held. I felt the air leave my chest. I waited for anger, for a sharp word, for her to turn away in disgust. Instead, she stood slowly, brushed the dirt from her knees, and spoke just loud enough for the evening to carry it. If you really want to see, just ask. Not a challenge, not an accusation. An invitation, plain and simple, delivered without a smile. My mouth opened and nothing came out except a cracked, "Is that allowed?" She tilted her head a fraction, the smallest movement, as if weighing the question and finding it honest enough. Depends on what you want to see. Then she picked up the shovel and walked back into her house, the screen door slapping shut behind her like a period at the end of a sentence. I stood there until the pile of leaves scattered again in the wind. That night I couldn't sleep. The clock crawled past midnight, past 1. I kept replaying her voice, low, steady, a little rough around the edges, and the way she hadn't flinched when she caught me watching. Around 1:30 I gave up, went downstairs, and stood at the kitchen window with a glass of water I didn't drink. The street was empty, the porch lights off, everything asleep. Then I heard it. 3 soft knocks. I opened the door, and there she was. Ivy, barefoot on the cold concrete, wearing an old navy coat over pajamas, hair loose around her shoulders. The porch light caught the faint lines around her eyes and made them look like secrets. "I figured you were still awake," she said. "About earlier. Sometimes the question matters more than the answer." I couldn't find words. My pulse was loud in my ears. She didn't step inside, didn't ask to. She just looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her eyes, then gave the smallest nod, like she'd confirmed whatever she came to check, and turned to leave. "Ivy," I started, not even knowing what I meant to say. She paused at the bottom step, glanced back. "Good night, Caleb." She knew my name. Of course she did. But hearing it in her voice, low and certain in the dark, felt like the first time anyone had ever really said it. The door closed behind me and I stood there a long time, the empty glass still in my hand, the night suddenly too big and too quiet all around me. Whatever boundary had existed between our 2 houses, between her past and my present, between watching and being seen, had just cracked wide open. And for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't sure I wanted to close it again. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm, the kind of early where the sky is still bruised purple and the air tastes metallic. I stood at the kitchen sink pretending to make coffee while staring at Ivy's house through the window. Nothing moved over there. The hydrangeas looked exactly the same. No sign anyone had buried anything the night before. For a second, I wondered if I'd dreamed the whole thing, the cedar box, the words across the fence, the midnight visit. Then I saw her. She was already outside, kneeling in the front flower bed with garden shears, trimming spent rose stems with quick, practiced cuts. She wore an old gray sweatshirt and jeans, hair tied back with what looked like a piece of twine. The sun was just clearing the rooftops and it lit the side of her face like a match struck in the dark. She looked up, saw me at the window, and lifted one hand in a small, ordinary wave. Nothing dramatic, just good morning, neighbor, as if she hadn't stood on my porch at 1:30 a.m. and changed the gravity in my house. I lifted my mug in return, feeling like an idiot. By the time I'd showered and pulled on work clothes, old man Larry was already shuffling down the sidewalk with his yapping terrier. He stopped at my gate the way he always does when he smells fresh gossip. "Morning, Caleb," he called, voice raspy from 60 years of cigarettes. "Saw you talking to Ivy last night. Late for a weekday." I tightened my grip on the truck keys. "Just being neighborly." Larry snorted. "Neighborly, right." He leaned in, lowering his voice like we were sharing a secret instead of standing in broad daylight. "You know what they say about her, don't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Larry had been waiting years for someone new to tell. Pretty woman, sure, keeps to herself. But before her husband wrapped that truck around a tree 6 years ago, there were cars in her driveway at all hours. Different cars, nice ones. And after the funeral? He clicked his tongue. Didn't slow down much. Folks figure she's got expensive habits or expensive friends. The dog yanked at the leash. Larry let himself be pulled a step, then added almost kindly, "Just watch yourself, son. Some fences are low for a reason." He shuffled off. I stood there long enough for the coffee to go cold in my hand. All day at the office, I couldn't focus. Numbers blurred. Load calculations felt pointless. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Larry's voice. Expensive habits, expensive friends. Layered over Ivy's quiet, "If you really want to see, just ask." By 5 o'clock, I was angry at myself for letting an old man's poison sink in so fast, and angrier still that part of me wanted to believe it might be true. It would be easier. Cleaner. A reason to step back. I drove home slow, windows down, trying to outrun the noise in my head. When I turned onto Dogwood Lane, the sun was low and orange, the street empty except for her. Ivy was watering the roses again, hose in one hand, the spray catching the light like scattered glass. She saw me, turned the nozzle off, and waited. I got out of the truck and walked over without thinking. The low fence between us felt suddenly ridiculous. "People say things about you," I said. The words came out rougher than I meant. She didn't flinch. "They always have." "I'm not asking for details," I lied. Larry cornered me this morning." Ivy set the hose down, wiped her hands on her jeans. "Let me guess, cars in the driveway, late nights. The grieving widow who didn't grieve hard enough." Her voice stayed level, almost amused, but her eyes were tired. "Anything else?" "That's the highlight reel." She studied me for a long second. "And you? Do you want the truth, Caleb? Or do you want the version that lets you sleep easy and keep your distance?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. The honest answer was, I didn't know. She gave a small nod like she'd expected that. "When you figure it out, you know where I live." She picked up the hose and turned the water back on, dismissing me without raising her voice. The spray hit the roses and the smell of wet earth rose between us, sharp and alive. I stood there another moment, then walked away, feeling like I'd just failed a test I didn't know I was taking. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer I didn't taste, watching her windows go dark one by one. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Somewhere inside me, something shifted, cracked, and started to ache in a way I hadn't let it ache since the divorce. I still didn't have my question, but for the first time in years, I wanted the answer badly enough that I was willing to risk what came with it. The rain started on a Thursday evening, thin at first, then hard and steady, the kind that turns gutters into rivers and makes the whole street smell like wet asphalt and regret. I was on the porch pretending to read when I saw Ivy hurrying up the sidewalk with two heavy grocery bags, no umbrella, hair plastered to her face. She was still a block away, fighting the wind, when one of the bags split and oranges rolled across the pavement like bright marbles. I didn't think. I grabbed the big golf umbrella by the door and ran. By the time I reached her, she was on her knees, gathering fruit, water streaming off her jacket. I held the umbrella over us both and crouched to help. "You're soaked," I said. "So are you now." Her voice was flat, exhausted. She didn't look at me. We collected what we could. One bag was ruined, so I took both handles. "Come on, my truck's right here. I'll drive you the last 20 feet. She hesitated only a second, then nodded. We ran through the downpour and I threw the groceries in the back seat. The cab filled with the smell of wet clothes and oranges. I started the engine, turned the heat on high, and pulled around the corner to her driveway. That should have been the end of it. Instead, when I killed the engine, neither of us moved. Rain hammered the roof like someone throwing handfuls of gravel, the windows fogged. For a long minute, the only sound was water and our breathing. Then Jack's pickup rolled past, slow. He saw us, of course he did. The brake lights glowed red, lingered, then moved on. I watched them disappear and felt something cold settle in my gut. Ivy spoke first, barely above the rain. "He'll have a new story by morning. Let him." She turned to me, eyes sharp even in the dim light. "You say that now." I met her stare. "I'm still here, aren't I?" Something shifted in her face. Surprise, maybe fear. She looked away, fingers tightening on the seatbelt strap. We sat another minute. The rain eased to a hiss. "I should go in," she said, but didn't reach for the door. "Ivy." I waited until she looked back. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want to know you're okay getting inside with those bags." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "I've carried heavier things alone for years. Not tonight." The words hung between us. She searched my face like she was trying to find the lie and couldn't. Then quietly, "Come in for a minute. Dry off. I'll make coffee." I should have said no, instead I nodded. Her house smelled like cedar and something faintly floral. She flicked on one lamp, dropped the ruined bag by the door, and disappeared into the kitchen. I stood dripping in the entryway, taking it in. Books stacked sideways, a single coffee mug on the table, no photographs on the walls. It felt like a place someone lived in but hadn't moved into yet. She came back with 2 towels and a mug that steamed. I took the towel, not the coffee. "Tell me," I said. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed tight. "Tell you what? All of it. The cars, the rumors, your husband. I want the version that isn't Larry's or Jack's." Her shoulders rose and fell once, a slow breath. Then she started talking, voice low, steady, like she'd practiced this in the mirror 1,000 times and still hated every word. "His name was Daniel. We married when I was 29. He was charming when he was sober. When he wasn't, he was cruel. Not always fists, sometimes words are sharper. I learned to be quiet. Very quiet. After 6 years, I started saving money he didn't know about. One night, he found the envelope. He put me in the hospital with 2 cracked ribs and a broken wrist. I pressed charges. He cried, promised. Went to 30 days of rehab. Came home worse." She looked at her hands, flexed them once. 3 months later, he wrapped his truck around an oak tree on Route 60. Blood alcohol twice the legal limit. The police ruled it an accident. The neighborhood ruled it my fault. Some said I drove him to it. Some said I was glad he was gone and threw parties to celebrate. Both stories were easier than believing a woman could be trapped and then set free by a crash. The rain had stopped. Water dripped from the gutters outside, loud in the silence. "I never had visitors," she said, "before or after. Just bruises that took a long time to fade." I felt sick. Not shock. Worse. Recognition. My own marriage had never been violent, but I knew the particular loneliness of living with someone who made you smaller every day. I set the untouched mug down. "I believe you." She looked up then, eyes wet but fierce. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I mean it." For the first time since I'd met her, Ivy looked like she might break. She didn't. She just nodded once, small and hard, like someone finally handing over a weight they'd carried alone for years. Outside, Jack's porch light flicked on, a yellow blade across the wet street. I picked up my keys, locked the door behind me. She walked me to it. Before I stepped out, she touched my arm, light, deliberate. "Thank you for the umbrella," she said. I looked back. "Any time it rains." And I meant every storm still coming. Sunday morning was bright and merciless, the kind of October sun that makes every leaf look like it's on fire. I was in the garage sorting nails when I heard the voices, first low, then sharp, then loud enough that the whole cul-de-sac could hear. Jack was in the middle of the street, red-faced, gesturing wildly at Ivy's mailbox. She stood on her front walk in an old denim shirt and gardening gloves, holding a handful of withered stems like she'd been caught doing something criminal. A half-dozen neighbors had already drifted out onto their lawns. Larry with his terrier, Mrs. Henderson clutching her robe, the young couple from the corner pretending to check their tires. "You think we forgot?" Jack shouted. "You think just because you keep your curtains closed now, the rest of us went blind?" Ivy didn't answer. She just looked at the ground, shoulders curved in the way people do when they're trying to make themselves smaller. Jack took a step closer. "My wife's cousin was one of the paramedics that night. Said your husband was still breathing when they cut him out of the wreck. Begged them to tell you he was sorry." "And where were you?" "Probably pouring champagne." A collective intake of breath rippled through the onlookers. Someone whispered, "Jesus, Jack." I dropped the coffee can of nails. They scattered across the concrete like gunfire. I was out of the garage before I felt my feet move. "Jack!" My voice came out calm, almost curious. I walked straight into the street until I stood between him and Ivy. "That's enough." He turned, surprised anyone had the nerve. "This doesn't concern you, Caleb." "Does now." He laughed, ugly and short. "Oh, I get it. Fresh meat. She's good at that, isn't she? Reels you in with the sad eyes, then—" I didn't think. My hand shot out and closed around the front of his shirt, twisting just enough that he had to rise onto his toes. The street went dead, quiet. "Finish that sentence," I said very softly, "and I swear to God, you'll do it through a wired jaw." Jack's eyes bulged. He wasn't a small man, but I had 4 inches and 20 years on him, and right then, every one of them felt like steel. I could feel the neighbors staring, phones half raised, unsure whether to call the cops or keep filming. I let go. He stumbled back 2 steps, face purple. "You don't know what she is," he spat. "I know exactly what she is." I turned my back on him, deliberately slowly, and faced Ivy. Her eyes were wide, stunned like she'd never seen anyone step in front of her before. I held out my hand. She looked at it for a long second, then dropped the dead stems and took it. Her fingers were ice. I faced the street again. Larry's mouth hung open. Mrs. Henderson had both hands over hers. "Listen up," I said, loud enough for every porch. 6 years ago, a man died because he chose a bottle over the woman he swore to love. That woman spent years learning how to be invisible so she wouldn't get hurt again. And every one of you decided it was easier to make her the villain than admit a good man could turn into a monster. I felt Ivy's grip tighten. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued. "From now on, anybody's got something to say about Ivy. You say it to me first. And you say it knowing I will remember every word." Jack opened his mouth, thought better, and closed it. I looked straight at him. "You want to keep talking, Jack? Be my guest. But the next time you open that mouth on this street, you'd better be ready to back it up with something more than whiskey and cowardice." Silence. Even the dogs had stopped barking. I turned to Ivy. "Come on." She let me lead her past the staring faces, up her walk to her door. Only when it shut behind us did her knees buckle. I caught her before she hit the floor, arms around her shaking body, her face pressed hard into my shoulder. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could feel her heart hammering against my ribs. Eventually, she pulled back just enough to look up at me, eyes red but clear. "You just burned every bridge on this street for me." "No," I said. "I just built a new one, and it only needs 2 people to stand on it." She stared another second, then did the last thing I expected. She laughed, short, startled, real, and the sound cracked something open in both of us. Outside, engines started, doors closed, the neighborhood pretending it had somewhere else to be. Inside, Ivy kept her hand in mine, and for the first time since I'd moved here, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something neither of us had to hide anymore. She stayed away for 5 days. No waves, no porch light left on, no shadow at the window. I told myself I understood. I just stood in the middle of the street and set fire to every safe corner she'd spent 6 years building. People like Ivy don't run toward the flames. They wait to see if the smoke clears. On the sixth night, the knock was so soft I almost missed it. I opened the door, and there she was, standing under the weak porch bulb with the cedar box cradled in both hands like an offering. Rain had started again, a cold mist that beaded on her hair and eyelashes. She wore the same navy coat from the first midnight visit, collar turned up, cheeks flushed from the chill. "You wanted to see," she said quietly. I stepped aside. "You don't owe me this." "I'm not paying a debt." She crossed the threshold, set the box on the coffee table, and looked at me straight. "I'm inviting you in." I closed the door. The house felt smaller with her in it, warmer, like someone had finally turned the heat on after years of winter. She sat on the edge of the couch and opened the lid herself. Inside, a small stack of photographs, edges curled, 3 letters tied with faded ribbon, a single pressed hydrangea bloom, brittle and blue, and on top, a sheet of heavy cream paper folded once. She didn't hand me anything yet. She just watched me take it all in. "These are the things I buried the night you saw me," she said. "I dig them up every year on the day he died. Remind myself why I stayed quiet. Then I bury them again so I can keep living." I sat beside her, close enough that our knees touched. The top photograph was a wedding picture. Her, younger, smiling, like someone who still believed promises. Him, handsome in a way that looked dangerous even then. She let me look, then set it aside. The letters were from her to herself, written during the worst years. I read only one line before the words blurred. "I am still here." That has to count for something. At the bottom lay the unfolded sheet. Newer paper, fresh ink. She finally handed it to me. It was addressed to no one and to everyone. I'm not the monster they decided I was. I was a woman who stayed too long and paid too much. I learned that survival sometimes looks like silence, and silence gets mistaken for guilt. One day I hope someone sees the difference. I finished reading and laid it down carefully, like it might bruise. "I don't need proof," I said. "I know." Her voice was soft, steady, but I needed to stop burying it alone. She closed the lid, set the box on the floor between us, and for the first time since I'd known her, Ivy let her shoulders drop all the way down. I reached for her hand. She turned it palm up and threaded our fingers together without hesitation. "Listen to me," I said. "From tonight on, when the street talks, let them. When the lights go out and the stories start again, you won't be on the other side of a fence listening alone. You'll be right here." A small sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. "Here feels pretty good," she whispered. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. Some things are bigger than that. Instead, she leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt the last of the distance between us turn into something solid and warm and ours. The rain kept falling soft now, washing the windows clean. Much later, when the house was dark and the only light came from the street lamp outside, she spoke into the quiet. "I used to think peace would feel empty," she said. "Turns out it just feels full." I pressed my lips to her temple, breathing her in, rain and cedar and something that finally smelled like home. Outside, the neighborhood slept behind its curtains and its rumors. Inside, 2 people who had spent years learning how to disappear discovered the quiet art of staying. No vows, no rings, no promises shouted to the rooftops. Just a cedar box on the floor, finally allowed to stay above ground, and 2 hands that had decided never to let go again. And for the first time in more years than either of us could count, the night didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like somewhere to live.